On an ordinary evening in New York, a nurse discovers a little girl lying unconscious on the street. But when she makes a call that changes everything, the voice on the other end belongs to a billionaire father who doesn't believe in weakness or in second chances. This is not just a story about wealth and power. It's about humanity, about the choices that define us and the bond that can form in the most unexpected places. Stay with us till the end, because every chapter uncovers a deeper truth. And if you love cinematic stories that touch the heart, don't forget to hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and give this video a like so we can bring you more powerful tales like this one. The city moved at its usual feverish pace. Honking horns, impatient footsteps, and the endless rush of New York's evening crowd blended into a restless soundtrack. The sidewalks pulsed with life, office workers chasing subways, vendors shouting for last-minute sales, tourists clinging to maps. In this chaos, no one noticed a small figure lying crumpled on the pavement. Natalie did. Her eyes had been trained for emergencies. Years in crowded hospital corridors had sharpened her instincts, and the sight of the girl brought her to a halt. A little body, fragile and motionless, was pressed against the cold concrete near a lamppost. Strands of chestnut hair covered a pale face. Her lips were tinted blue. Natalie's bag slipped off her shoulder as she rushed forward. Kneeling beside the girl, she placed trembling fingers against the child's neck. A pulse. Weak but there. She exhaled relief, already switching into nurse mode. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her voice was calm, steady. No response. The girl's breathing was shallow, her chest barely rising. Natalie pulled her phone free and dialed for an ambulance. Her other hand gently adjusted the girl's head to keep her airway clear. Around them, people slowed but few stopped. The city rarely paused for anyone. 8-year-old female, unconscious, possible hypoglycemia or respiratory distress. She reported crisply to the dispatcher. "Send a unit now." Her eyes darted to the small backpack half unzipped beside the child. A school ID peeked from the open pocket. She slid it out, reading the name, Ava Pierce. Alongside it, a card bore an emergency contact number. Natalie didn't hesitate. She dialed. The line rang twice before a deep, clipped voice answered. "Yes." "Mr. Pierce, this is Nurse Natalie Parker. I'm on 42nd Street. Your daughter Ava is here. She's unconscious. The ambulance is on its way." There was silence on the other end, the kind that stretched heavy, broken only by the faint echo of traffic in the background. Then the voice returned, low and commanding. "Stay with her. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The call ended without another word. Natalie brushed a hand across Ava's forehead. "Cool, clammy." She kept talking softly, as though the girl could hear. "Hold on, Ava. Help's coming." Within minutes, the sleek shadow of a black Bentley swept to the curb. The driver leapt out, but it was a man who followed that made heads turn. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked carved to his frame, he carried himself with the unshakable assurance of power. The crowd parted without knowing why. Grayson Pierce, billionaire investor, a name that appeared often in financial headlines, usually paired with words like ruthless, ambitious, untouchable. Now his gaze fell on the small body of his daughter lying on the ground. For a fraction of a second, the armor of composure cracked. His steps faltered. His jaw tightened. But when his eyes lifted to Natalie, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by steel. "What happened?" His voice was measured, almost too controlled. "She collapsed," Natalie replied firmly, rising to meet his gaze. "Pulse is weak. Breathing shallow. The ambulance is on the way." He knelt beside Ava, brushing her hair back. The tenderness of the gesture clashed with the icy calm in his expression. "Ava," he murmured, his voice breaking ever so slightly. The girl didn't stay. Natalie crouched again. "She needs immediate evaluation. Blood sugar, oxygen, cardiac monitoring. You should ride with her to the hospital." Grayson's eyes flicked to her, sharp as glass. "And you? Who are you?" "A nurse who happened to be here at the right time," she said evenly. "Or the wrong time, depending on how you see it." For a moment, they locked eyes, Hayes steady, compassionate, his unreadable, assessing. The distant wail of sirens cut through the tension. Moments later, Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Natalie helped guide Ava onto it, adjusting the oxygen mask over her face. Grayson stayed close, one hand gripping his daughter's small fingers as though anchoring her to the world. "Which hospital?" he demanded. "St. Vincent's," a medic answered. "Drive. Now." The ambulance door slammed shut, and the vehicle lurched into motion. Natalie stood on the curb, heart pounding, breath shallow. The city surged around her again, indifferent. She should have walked away. Her part was done. But something in Ava's pale face lingered in her mind. Something in the billionaire's cold, unyielding tone unsettled her. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Natalie picked up her bag, but her eyes stayed on the vanishing ambulance lights. She didn't know why, but deep down, she felt it. The call she had made tonight was about to change not just a little girl's life, but her own. As the story unfolds, one truth becomes clear. Moments like this change live forever. If this journey is pulling you in, take a second to like this video and let us know in the comments what you would have done in Natalie's place. The ambulance's siren faded into the night as it pulled into St. Vincent's emergency bay. Floodlights washed the entrance in harsh white, and the team hurried Ava through sliding doors. Grayson followed without hesitation, his presence like a storm entering a quiet room. Natalie, despite telling herself her role was finished, found her feet carrying her after them. Inside, the sterile world of the hospital swallowed the chaos of the street. Beeping monitors, rushing gurneys, and clipped medical orders filled the air. Ava was wheeled into a treatment room, doctors immediately surrounding her. Natalie stood just outside, instinct urging her to stay close, though technically, her duty as a bystander was over. Through the small window, she saw Grayson at his daughter's side. The man who dominated boardrooms and crushed rivals now sat stiffly in a plastic chair, hands clenched, watching monitors light up with numbers he couldn't control. For all his wealth, in this room, he was powerless. A doctor approached. "She's stable for now. Hypoglycemia caused a collapse. We'll admit her overnight for observation and run full labs. She needs careful management." Grayson nodded once, curt and final, as though signing a contract. But when the doctor suggested overnight nursing, his gaze shifted to Natalie, who still lingered nearby. "You," he said, his tone more command than request. "You know her condition. Stay with her." Natalie blinked. "Mr. Pierce, I'll pay whatever rate you require," he interrupted. "But she trusts you. She needs you here." Natalie hesitated. Accepting meant stepping into a life far beyond her own. Yet the sight of Ava's small hand clutching the bedsheet ended the debate. "I'll stay," she said quietly. Later that night, Natalie followed Grayson and Ava into the world that was his, the kind of world she had only glimpsed in magazines. The Pierce residence stood on the Upper East Side, a fortress of glass and steel rising above the city. Its towering facade gleamed with reflected lights, cold and immaculate. The driver pulled a car beneath an arched entrance, and doors opened to a cavernous hall lined with marble floors and muted chandeliers. Art pieces, each worth more than Natalie would own in years, hung like silent sentinels along the walls. Yet despite the grandeur, the house felt hollow. Natalie stepped in cautiously, her shoes clicking against stone. "It's beautiful," she said under her breath. "It's a house," Grayson replied, his tone flat. "Not a home." He led her upstairs, past endless hallways, until they reached a suite where Ava's room had been prepared. Natalie followed, noting the starkness, designer furniture, custom drapes, but little sign of a child's laughter. No drawings taped to the walls, no toys scattered across the floor, only order and silence. Ava, already drowsy from treatment, nestled into the sheets. Natalie tucked the blanket around her, whispering, "You'll be okay, sweetheart. I'll be right here." Ava's eyelids fluttered, and for the first time since the street, a faint smile touched her lips. When Natalie turned, she found Grayson standing in the doorway, watching. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a sharp edge. "She responds to you." Natalie shrugged lightly. Children know when someone sees them. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with something unsaid. Grayson's jaw tightened. Her mother is gone. Since then, Ava has been distant, withdrawn. Natalie softened. She needs warmth, Stability, not perfection. His eyes flashed. I give her everything. The best doctors, the best education, the safest environment. The safest isn't always the happiest, Natalie countered gently. She needs to feel loved, not managed. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Grayson's gaze hardened, his pride pricked. Few people spoke to him this way. Yet beneath the frost, something shifted, a flicker of awareness he quickly buried. The days that followed set an uneasy rhythm. Natalie cared for Ava with quiet dedication, monitoring her health, coaxing her into eating properly, drawing her into conversation. She discovered Ava's love for drawing, her fascination with bedtime stories, her quiet fear of being alone. Slowly, Ava began to blossom, her laughter filling corners of the house long silent. Grayson, meanwhile, observed from a distance. His empire demanded his time, yet he found himself drawn back to scenes he didn't fully understand. A nurse kneeling on the carpet beside his daughter, both heads bent over a storybook. Laughter echoing from the kitchen, when Natalie persuaded Ava to crack eggs into pancake batter. One morning, he entered the dining room to find Ava grinning proudly as she presented a lopsided pancake dusted with sugar. Natalie stood beside her, smiling. "Try it, Daddy," Ava urged, eyes shining. Grayson hesitated, unused to such simple invitations. But under Natalie's expectant gaze, he picked up a fork, tasting the misshapen creation. A pause, then, "Not bad." Ava clapped in delight. Natalie caught the subtle curve of his mouth, half a smile, quickly hidden. Yet tension simmered beneath the fragile piece. Grayson's world was built on control, on efficiency, on never revealing weakness. Natalie's presence, her insistence on warmth over wealth, unsettled him. One evening, as she adjusted Ava's bedtime monitor, he lingered in the doorway again. "You've disrupted her routine," he said, voice low but pointed. "She's not a project," Natalie replied evenly. "She's a little girl. She needs more than charts and schedules." His gaze narrowed. "And you think you know better than her father." "I think," Natalie said, her tone steady, "that sometimes love looks different than power. And she needs both." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. His eyes locked on Hayes, a clash of worlds neither wanted to yield. Finally, he turned away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Natalie exhaled, the weight of his pride pressing against her resolve. She glanced back at Ava, peacefully asleep, and whispered to herself, "For her, I'll stay." What she didn't know was that the fragile balance of this house, the glass fortress built on silence, was already beginning to crack. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the Pierce mansion shifted. Where once silence reigned, now faint traces of life began to stir. It was subtle at first, laughter echoing down a hallway, the sound of crayons scratching across paper, the smell of pancakes drifting from the kitchen. At the center of it all was Natalie. She moved through the house with a quiet ease, carrying Ava into moments of warmth the mansion had long forgotten. She coaxed her into coloring books, encouraged her to eat proper meals, and read her stories late into the night. Slowly, Ava shed the fragility that had clung to her since that night on the street. Her cheeks grew rosy again, her eyes sparkled with curiosity. And Grayson noticed. Often, he returned from long meetings to find his daughter on the carpet, sprawled beside Natalie, giggling over drawings of castles and gardens. Or he'd pass by the music room and hear Ava's uncertain piano notes, steadied by Natalie's patient encouragement. For a man who measured life in profits and losses, these scenes were unfamiliar territory. He didn't quite know how to stand in them. One evening, as Natalie tucked Ava into bed, the little girl clutched her hand. "Stay until I fall asleep," she whispered. "Of course." Natalie smiled, smoothing her hair. "I'll be right here." From the doorway, Grayson watched silently. Ava's breathing slowed, her small fingers curled into Natalie's palm. It should have been him sitting there, but his daughter had reached for someone else. The realization cut deeper than he admitted, though pride kept his face impassive. When Natalie finally slipped out of the room, she found Grayson waiting in the hall. His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "She trusts you," he said. Natalie nodded. Children sense when someone won't leave. There was a pause. His expression flickered, as if the words struck somewhere private. but he quickly masked it. "Thank you," he said curtly, before retreating into his study. Ava's bond with Natalie grew stronger each day. On a quiet Saturday morning, Natalie suggested a small adventure, something the house had never offered. "Let's cook breakfast together," she said brightly, tying a too large apron around Ava. In the gleaming kitchen, they set about cracking eggs, whisking batter, and laughing at the flour dust that clung to Ava's hair. Natalie guided her carefully, letting the child feel proud of every clumsy attempt. Grayson entered midway, expecting the usual sterile calm. Instead, he found chaos, flour on counters, dishes scattered, his daughter giggling uncontrollably as Natalie flipped a lopsided pancake. Ava turned, eyes glowing. "Daddy, I made this for you." Grayson hesitated, unused to such invitations. Natalie handed him a plate with a faint smile, silently urging him to play along. He took a bite, the taste uneven but sincere. "Not bad," he said gruffly. Ava's laughter filled the room. Natalie caught the brief curve of his lips, a smile quickly hidden behind his coffee cup. Later that afternoon, while Ava napped, Natalie wandered into the garden for air. The Pierce estate stretched like a private fortress, immaculate hedges, marble fountains, trimmed roses arranged with military precision. Beautiful, but lifeless. She sat on a stone bench, the city skyline faint in the distance. Memories surfaced uninvited. Long nights in foster homes, the ache of not belonging, the determination to make something of herself. For years, she had built her life around caring for others, but never quite finding a place she could call her own. Her thoughts were interrupted by Grayson's voice. "You've managed to turn my kitchen into a battlefield." Natalie looked up, startled. He stood a few feet away, suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled. For once, he seemed less like the untouchable billionaire and more like a man at rest, though even rest looked guarded on him. "She enjoyed it," Natalie replied. "That's what matters." He studied her for a moment, then sat across the bench. The air between them carried an unspoken tension. "You said earlier," he began, "that children know who won't leave. Where did that come from?" Natalie hesitated. She rarely spoke of her past, but something in his tone, sharp yet curious, urged honesty. "I grew up in foster care. People came and went. Promises broke easily. I learned to stop expecting anyone to stay." Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly, not with judgment, but with thought. "And yet you stayed. For her." "She deserves someone who won't walk away," Natalie said simply. The silence stretched again. The man known for cutting deals in seconds seemed uncertain of his next move. Finally, he stood, slipping his mask of composure back into place. "Dinner at 7, he said briskly, before walking away. Natalie exhaled, realizing her hands trembled. Something was shifting, subtle, fragile, but undeniable. That evening, they dined together for the first time. Ava chatted happily about her day, waving her fork to emphasize every story. Natalie listened intently, encouraging her, while Grayson sat quietly, more observer than participant. Yet when Ava leaned against him, resting her head on his arm, his hand instinctively steadied her. Natalie caught the gesture, her chest tightening. Beneath the armor of wealth and pride, there was a father desperate to connect but unsure how. After Ava went to bed, the house grew quiet again. Natalie lingered in the living room, tidying stray books. She felt Grayson's presence before she saw him. "You've changed her," he said simply. Natalie turned. "She's always been this child. She just needed space to be herself." His gaze held haze, unyielding, yet softened by something he couldn't quite admit. "You've done more in weeks than I managed in years." Natalie swallowed, unsure how to answer. Before she could, he turned away, retreating into the shadows of his study. She stood alone, the weight of his words pressing heavy on her chest. The cracks in his armor were showing, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what lay beneath. The calm did not last. For a time, it seemed the Pierce estate had found a fragile balance. Ava laughed more freely. Natalie moved through the house with growing confidence, and even Grayson seemed less like a shadow behind glass. But wealth is rarely left unexamined, and secrets never remain quiet for long. It began with a photograph. One morning, as Natalie walked Ava to the gates for her school ride, a man crouched by the hedges clicked his camera. The shutter was barely audible, but the flash of movement caught Natalie's attention. She turned sharply, shielding Ava, but the man was already gone. That afternoon, headlines spread like wildfire. Mystery woman moves into Pierce Mansion. Who is she? Paparazzi swarmed the estate gates, hungry for scandal. Photos showed Natalie holding Ava's hand, smiling down at her protectively. To the outside world, it was not a nurse in her charge. It was fuel for wild speculation. Grayson stormed into the living room, newspaper in hand, his jaw tight. Care to explain this? Natalie looked up from the book she was helping Ava read. There's nothing to explain. They took pictures. That's all. They don't see it that way, he snapped, tossing the paper onto the table. They think you're after money. That you... He stopped, as if the words tasted bitter. Natalie stiffened. That I what? That I'm some gold digger who saw your daughter on the street and thought this was my ticket to fortune. Ava's wide eyes darted between them. Daddy, don't yell at her. The pleas silenced the room. Grayson exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ava, sweetheart, go upstairs for a bit. She hesitated, clutching Natalie's arm. I don't want her to leave. Natalie squeezed her hand gently. I'm not going anywhere. Go on. I'll be right here. When Ava finally left, the air between Natalie and Grayson crackled with tension. You have no idea what the media can do, he said lowly. Every move, every word. They'll twist it. I cannot let Ava become their spectacle. Natalie rose, fire in her voice. Do you think I want this? I didn't invite them here. I'm here because your daughter needs me. If that's a problem, then maybe you should decide what matters more, your reputation or her happiness. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Grayson stared at her, his mask slipping just long enough to reveal the conflict beneath. He wanted to protect Ava, but his world had always been built on control, image, power. Natalie threatened that without even trying. Finally, he turned away. Dinner will be served at 7. His tone was clipped, but his steps were heavier than before. That night, Natalie lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Old fears returned, memories of being labeled, misunderstood, discarded. She had fought her whole life to be seen for who she was, not for what others assumed. Now the world painted her as a parasite clinging to a billionaire's fortune. But when she thought of Ava's small hand clinging to Hayes, the resolve hardened again. Leaving wasn't an option, not when that little girl had already been abandoned too many times. The storm outside grew literal days later. Rain lashed against the windows. The wind howled across the estate grounds. Ava was restless, sensing the tension in the house. Natalie found her curled in the library, clutching a stuffed bear. Why are people saying mean things about you? Ava asked softly. Natalie's heart twisted. Sometimes people don't understand what they see, sweetheart. But what matters is the truth. And the truth is, I'm here because I care about you. Ava leaned against her, comforted. Promise you'll stay. Natalie kissed her hair. I promise. Unbeknownst to them, Grayson stood in the doorway, unseen. The words pierced through him, heavier than any headline. The following evening, Grayson called Natalie into his study. Papers littered his desk, legal documents, drafted statements, PR strategies. I've arranged for a press release, he said curtly. It'll state you're Ava's temporary caretaker. Nothing more. It will calm speculation. Natalie's stomach tightened. Temporary. That's what this was supposed to be, he replied. A short-term arrangement, until Ava regained her footing. Her voice dropped. And what if she needs more than that? For a moment, silence. Rain tapped against the window. Grayson's jaw clenched, as though waging war with himself. She needs stability, he said finally, not someone the media will rip apart. Natalie's chest burned. Stability doesn't come from hiding behind statements. It comes from people who actually stay. His eyes met hers then, sharp and conflicted. For once, he didn't have an answer. That night, the storm outside mirrored the one inside. The cracks that had begun to soften between them now widened. Both carried truth they were afraid to admit. Natalie her fear of being discarded, Grayson his fear of losing control. And as Ava slept peacefully upstairs, unaware of the world's judgment, the two adults who cared for her stood on opposite sides of the same battle. Neither realized that the storm was only just beginning. The silence in the mansion was deafening. Days had passed since the confrontation, but its echo lingered in every hallway. Natalie kept a distance, limiting her presence to Ava's room and the clinic visits. Her voice, once warm and steady in the house, now felt guarded. Grayson noticed the change, though he told himself it was for the best. The press outside had grown relentless. Flashbulbs lit up the gates every morning. Headlines speculated wildly. Grayson Pierce's mystery caretaker, nanny or lover. Pierce heiress bonds with outsider. Each story clawed deeper into Grayson's carefully built fortress. Investors called with concern. Board members urged him to act. At a late-night meeting, one voice was blunt. Distance yourself from her. Publicly, or the damage will spread. That night, Grayson sat alone in his study, staring at the empty glass in his hand. For years, his empire had thrived because he never hesitated, never faltered. Yet when he thought of Natalie's eyes, hurt, defiant, unwilling to be reduced to a footnote, his resolve crumbled. Still, he chose silence. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. Natalie was leaving Ava school when a crowd of photographers cornered her. Questions were hurled like stones. Are you living with Grayson Pierce? Are you marrying into the fortune? Who were you before this? The flashes blinded her as Ava clung to her side, trembling. Natalie tried to shield the child, her voice breaking. Back away. She's just a little girl. Ava began to cry, burying her face into Natalie's coat. Security rushed them inside, but the damage was done. The next morning's headline read, Pierce heiress in Taze, the cause of scandal. Grayson's fury erupted, but this time it wasn't aimed at the press. It was aimed at Natalie. You should have been more careful, he snapped in the hallway, his voice cold. Natalie froze. Careful? I was protecting your daughter while they cornered us like prey, and you think this is my fault. You brought chaos into her life, he said, his words like ice. This isn't working anymore. The words cut sharper than he intended, but he didn't take them back. For Natalie, it was a final blow. That night, she packed her few belongings. She kissed Ava's forehead as the girl slept, whispering through tears, I love you, little one. Don't forget that. And then she was gone. When Ava woke the next morning, she ran room to room, calling Natalie's name. Realization sank in slowly, like cold water. She turned to her father with tear-streaked cheeks. Daddy, where is she? Grayson's throat tightened. She had to leave. Sweetheart. Ava's small fist pounded his chest. You made her go. She promised me she'd stay, and you made her leave. The words shattered him more than any headline. For the first time in years, Grayson felt powerless. The mansion grew darker with her absence. Ava withdrew, refusing meals, locking herself in her room. Her laughter, once returned to the halls, disappeared. Grayson buried himself in work, but every contract, every boardroom victory felt hollow. Late one night, he found himself in the library, staring at the chair where Natalie once read with Ava. His chest ached with a truth he could no longer deny. Wealth had shielded him from many losses, but it could not buy what she had given so freely: warmth, honesty, love without agenda. His mind returned to Ava's tearful words. She promised me she'd stay. For the first time in decades, Grayson felt fear, not of losing control, but of losing the two people who gave his life meaning. The search began quietly. Through contacts, he learned Natalie had returned to her small apartment in Queens. She'd taken on extra hospital shifts, blending back into a life of long hours and worn-out scrubs. Yet even there, she was not untouched. Gossip had followed her, patients whispering, colleagues eyeing her with suspicion. Grayson stood outside her building one evening, rain dripping from the brim of his coat. Through the lit window, he saw her moving about her kitchen, weary but steady. For the first time, he realized how much strength it had taken for her to stand against his world. But he didn't knock. Not that night. Instead, he returned home to Ava, who sat by the window clutching the stuffed bear Natalie had given her. When is she coming back? Ava whispered. Grayson crouched, his voice breaking. I don't know, but I'll find a way. It was any understood. Money, power, control. None of it mattered if it cost him his daughter's trust and the woman who had shown him what family truly meant. The next morning, for the first time in his life, Grayson Pierce canceled a board meeting. He told his advisors, "The company will manage without me. My family will not." And with that, the search for Natalie truly began, not as a billionaire, not as a man guarding his empire, but as a father desperate for his daughter's happiness, and a man finally brave enough to face his own heart. The storm had taken much, but in its wake, it left clarity. Grayson Pierce had faced hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and storms of scandal. Yet nothing had prepared him for the silence of his daughter's room, where Ava sat day after day, waiting for someone who no longer walked the mansion's halls. He had lost control of the narrative, but more importantly, he had lost the trust of the two people who mattered most. One evening, after Ava had fallen asleep with her small hand still gripping the stuffed bear, Grayson opened his laptop, not to review stock reports or market forecasts, but to type a letter. His words were simple, stripped of the armor he usually wore. "I built walls to protect what I thought mattered. But all the walls did was keep out the only person who brought life back into this house. If you can forgive me, I'll be waiting. Not as a billionaire, not as a man of power, just as Ava's father, and a man who wants to be worthy of you." He printed the letter, folded it, and drove through the night to Queens. Natalie answered her apartment door to find him standing there, rain-soaked and unguarded. For a moment, she froze, memories of their last fight flickering painfully. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know," he admitted, handing her the letter, "but I had to be." Natalie hesitated, then unfolded the paper. As her eyes traced the words, the walls she had built trembled. For the first time, Grayson wasn't commanding, defending, or accusing. He was simply human. When she looked up, his gaze was steady but vulnerable. "Ava needs you. And if I'm honest, so do I." Her voice broke. "Do you even know what you're asking? To step back into a world that chews people alive." "Yes," he said, "but this time it won't be you alone. It will be us. Together." Silence stretched, heavy and raw. Natalie's heart wore between the scars of betrayal and the undeniable pull of what they had found. "Finally," she whispered, "take me to her." Back at the mansion, Ava stirred awake to the sound of the door opening. When she saw Natalie step into her room, her eyes widened. "You came back," she cried, rushing forward. Natalie knelt, arms open wide, catching the child against her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I promised, didn't I?" From the doorway, Grayson watched, his chest tight with relief. For once, he did not step in to control the moment. He let it unfold, raw and imperfect, but real. The weeks that followed were not without challenges. The press still circled, eager for scraps of scandal. But when one journalist shouted questions at Natalie outside the estate, Grayson stepped forward instead. "She is not a story," he said firmly. "She is the woman my daughter trusts. And she is the woman I love." The word rippled across headlines, but for once, Grayson didn't care. He had chosen his truth over appearances. Behind the mansion walls, change began. Natalie no longer felt like an outsider. She moved through the house as if it were her own. Ava thrived, her laughter returning, her fears softening. Meals were shared, not in silence but with warmth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ava tugged Grayson's sleeve. "Daddy, are we a family now?" He looked at Natalie, who smiled softly, her hand resting over Ava's. Then he knelt, brushing a strand of hair from his daughter's face. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Months later, the Pierce estate were quieter. The paparazzi had moved on, the scandal had faded, and life had taken on a new rhythm. In the garden, beneath the canopy of late-blooming roses, a small gathering stood witness as vows were spoken. Natalie wore a simple dress, Ava clutching her bouquet as the proudest flower girl the city had ever seen. Grayson's words were steady, stripped of pretense. "I spent years thinking power was my shield. But love, yours, and Ava's, showed me what strength really is. I vow never to take it for granted again." When they exchanged rings, Ava clapped with delight, whispering to Natalie, Now you can never leave us." Natalie kissed her forehead. "Never, my love, never." That night, as twilight draped the city, the three of them stood on the balcony. The skyline glittered, distant and cold, but the warmth between them outshone it all. Ava leaned against them, her voice sleepy but certain. "We're home." Grayson tightened his arm around them both, his heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, the mansion wasn't just a fortress of wealth. It was a home, alive with love. The storms had passed. What remained was not perfection, but something stronger, a family forged in truth, in resilience, and in the courage to begin again. In the end, what began as a call on a crowded New York street became the story of a father, a nurse, and a child learning to heal together. Wealth could not buy what they found: trust, love, and a chance at family. If this story touched you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories of resilience, redemption, and the human spirit, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because every story has the power to change the way we see the world.